Oh, okay. Judith, why don't you do the introductions?
Yeah, so I was saying sorry about that. I was wondering why I wasn't being interpreted, and then I just realized I was on mute. So, my name is Judith Hellestein. I'm the secretary of the ISOC Accessibility Special Interest Group. And this is the second of our series of webinars on accessible meetings. Um, this one is going to be on how to make documents accessible. We have so many, we're going to so many different virtual meetings, and what I've seen is that documents are not accessible. There are pictures or images in PowerPoints, um, images on in Word documents or in social media. I do not have alt text describing the photos, and my lately big uh, problem that I've noticed is that people are scanning documents that are on paper in a scanner, and they're not doing it as readable PDFs. They're doing it as images. And so we're hoping by this discussion is that we can show people some easy ways of making documents accessible, whether it's a Word document, whether it is a PDF, PowerPoint, also how you can easily add tags to your photos, whether you're on social media or others. LinkedIn allows very easy tagging of photos. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to here. We are going to be having another series. The next in our series is on November 19th. It's going to be at 9 a.m. Eastern, which is will be 14 will be 1400 UTC, and it's going to be in partnership with Gallaudet University, and it's going to focus on both on the deaf and the hard of hearing community. After that, we will have a November 30th event, which will be actually on our side of the world on November 29th. It is a collaboration with the Pacific chapter of the Internet Society and the Pacific Development Disability Forum. On December 3rd, not part of the series, but also part of the Accessibility SIG, as part of Disability Day, Worldwide Disability Day, we are going to be relaunching the new accessibility toolkit, and we'll have a discussion with the ISOC president and CEO, Andrew Sullivan. So stay tuned for a whole great series of events. We will get registration out for all of them. And right now, I would like to turn it over to Greg Shatton, who is our presenter. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I greet you from New York City, where we are all hunkered down and hoping that things don't get worse in this pandemic ridden world. Uh, in any case, if I could ask that my screen sharing be enabled by the host, that would be great because I have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you all. Very good. Okay.
Space mute. Currently unmuted. Hold plus A button to activate. Press space bar. The share content is with your screen to see the.
Okay. So hopefully you're seeing the correct screen. Let me just resize my window. Suddenly my window got very small here. Unexpectedly.
Sorry.
Could people stay on mute during the entire time, and when we have the Q&A, then you can go off mute. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome. Judith, can you just confirm that you're seeing the title of my slide as
Yes,
the
I
shared screen?
confirm that.
Thank you very much. So this is a big topic that I was asked to cover. And in some sense, maybe this is part one, and part two will come at a later date. Although a lot of this is applicable across different platforms and different forms of media. But today I'll be focusing on accessibility issues as they relate to social media and to video presentations. Documents will largely be saved for another day. But of course, accessibility concepts are universal in many ways. So we'll start our discussion with accessible social media. But let's take a step backwards at the bigger picture. First, here's a summary of what we'll be talking about this morning. And I'll call it this morning, even though it may be afternoon or evening for others, because it definitely feels like morning to me. Generally, why does accessibility matter? If you're on this call, you probably don't need to ask that question, but nonetheless, it's important to put everything in context. Next, we'll be turning to how to make your social media accessible or more accessible, then making video presentations accessible, in particular video over social media. Then we'll have some time for questions and answers, and after that I will thank you for sitting here and listening or being interpreted through to attend this presentation. So let's get right into the subject matter. As many of us probably already know, roughly 10% of the world's population are people with disabilities. And this includes those who are blind and visually impaired, deaf and hearing impaired, those with motor disabilities, cognitive and intellectual disabilities, or neurological disabilities. All of these should be taken into account and should have full equality and accessibility, especially on this wonderful electronic platform of the internet, which should be a great leveler, but at the same time it creates all sorts of digital divides between those who have the internet and those who do not, and those who have easy access to the internet and those who do not, and those who can access everything on the internet more easily, and those who do not. And it's an incredibly important piece of social equity and just moral appropriateness, as well as there's just no justification not for being accessible other than people are some cases not well informed, and that's for whatever other reasons. I can't deal with those in the next hour or so, but I can deal with information, and so that's what I'll hope to provide. For myself, I will note that an aging population is a contributing factor to those who have disabilities, as some of us grow into it. And I don't see as well as I used to. I'm certainly better off than many, but it is frustrating. My son is colorblind. My brother-in-law is blind. So there are varying degrees of disability, but in what is inherently an audio-visual medium, and as well has so many different modes of communication attached. It's important to keep accessibility in mind. If there's one thing we've learned in the pandemic, it's that the need for internet connectivity, for internet usability, and for internet accessibility is greater than ever before, and it really is it's a need, not a want, and it's a human right to be able to communicate and be communicated with fully, especially when so much can be taken away so easily. And it's particular. I think that as a member of the Internet Society, I think of us in some ways as a steward of the Internet, a steward of the open and free Internet. And that's why the accessibility group exists, among other reasons, is that we need to bring an open Internet to all. And so we're looking to remove all of the barriers that we can for accessibility for people with disabilities. Social media is an incredible phenomenon that has changed the face of the internet, and for many people is a large part of what they consider the internet. Depending on the country that you're in, many people's time on the internet is spent around 1/3 of the time on social media. And in terms of communication,
Currently unmuted. Hold +A button. M.
in terms of being communicated with and communicating, it's an even larger part in terms of being interactive. There are a lot of different types of social media. We'll look at some of the specific social media platforms in a moment, but you can use social media as a method of communicating from one person to all. And in this case, you are the all, even though I would not call Zoom a social media platform, but this is a one-to-all communication, or a one-to-some, since you did have to register and get here. So it's really more one-to-some. But something like Facebook or Twitter, where you can put something out to the public and potentially every user of that platform can see it, as that is an incredible tool, an incredibly powerful tool. Social media is also used as a one-to-one communicating device, either through direct messaging or other forms of communication. It is many people use social media as their phone, voice over internet. So it is the voice communication. It is used for posting pictures and videos to people. It can be a synchronous communication device where both sides of the conversation are on at the same time, and it's asynchronous where you leave things for people to see at a later time. So this is an incredibly powerful tool. The internet itself is only roughly 50 years old, maybe 51 now. The World Wide Web is about half that age. And social media isn't even that old, although in some ways social media is older than the World Wide Web, since Usenet groups and other methods of chat and the like and bulletin boards existed before the web as we know it. But the web made it much more available to everyone. Social media is also it's everywhere and it's happening all the time. The amount of social media being disseminated is incredible. Just for one statistic, and I won't bore you with a lot of them because it's all sort of obvious. In a survey in 2019, there were 350 million tweets a minute. Don't even try to do the math as to how many tweets that means there are in a year, but just on one social media platform, admittedly one of the most popular ones, the idea that there are 350 million communications a minute is truly amazing. So social media is clearly an incredibly empowering tool, but it's incredibly disempowering if you can't access it or if you can't access all of its features, whether you're the communicator or the recipient of communications. And of course, that's a very blurry line with the internet and with social media in particular. So this presentation is aimed more at the content creator or speaker or writer than at the recipient. But of course, the recipient, it's very important to know where the tools are and how to use them. But the recipient being a person with disabilities is at the mercy, unfortunately, of the communicator to make their communication accessible. So this is an attempt to bridge a little bit of that gap and create more accessible social media. So the social media universe expands and shifts over time. The popular social media of today, some of it existed 5 or 10 years ago, some of it barely existed a year ago. Things that we thought were incredibly popular, like MySpace, are now barely more than a distant memory. But looking at some of the most popular platforms, and we have, of course, Facebook with all of its different options. And that includes Facebook Messenger, which is a more of a chat tool and message tool. Facebook, of course, also owns Instagram, which is on the list as well. Social media platforms often try to offer every mode of communication that they can, or gradually over time expand into more. Some are more specialized than others, but across the universe here, we have different platforms with different goals, but many common tools and many common concerns. Of course, YouTube and Twitter, and Instagram and Tumblr and WhatsApp and LinkedIn are among the most popular worldwide. And one interesting thing over time is that more platforms have become worldwide in their use. There are certainly platforms that are strong only in certain countries, but in many ways, the divide that we saw 5 or 10 years ago, where platforms were more local than global, has changed. But we have, for instance, VKontakte and Odnoklassniki in Russia and parts of Eastern Europe and the Near East, Qzone in China, Line in India, Kakao Talk in Korea, WeChat, which started in China but is now all over the place. TikTok, which in many ways is the most surprising, or at least the most quickly growing. Interestingly, when I did some research for this, if you go back a year or two in discussions of social media popularity, TikTok doesn't even show up. TikTok essentially did not exist a couple of years ago, and now it is up in the top ranks of popular social media, and also somewhat controversial in that the U.S. government has dictated that part of it in the United States be transferred to another company. Skype, in many ways, started out as an alternative phone service, essentially, and now is social media in many different ways. And of course, there are many platforms like Zoom and Teams and other communication efforts, which, while not social media per se, share many of the same characteristics, and also raise many of the same concerns regarding lack of accessibility. So much of what I'll get to today, as we get to the substance, is really transferable to platforms like the one that we are on right now. So let's get to the meat of this presentation and discuss some of the general principles of being an accessible social media communicator. First is fairly basic, but yet probably the most ignored rule by most people, sadly, which is that you need to find and you need to use the accessibility features of each platform that you're on. Each platform has varying levels of accessibility tools available, and some of them make them more easily available than others. In any case, everyone should work on being very curious and being an explorer, and finding the tools that are within each of your social media platforms. And of course, everyone here is both a communicator and a recipient. That is the nature of social media. So everyone here will benefit, and everyone here will need to learn what is out there. As Judith mentioned, alt tags, alternative text for images, is one of the most fundamental of accessibility tools. And there are various alt tag editors that are available within social media platforms, such as LinkedIn and Instagram and others as well. Of course, you can add alt tags in your photo or camera or photo editor software. There are accessibility checkers in various forms of social media, not all, of course. PowerPoint, for instance, does have a social media an accessibility checker built into it now, which is something it didn't have a while ago. Of course, automated checkers can only do so much, but it is at least a leap forward that it's available to everyone who's using a given platform. There are, of course, captioning and subtitling tools for videos that are built into certain video platforms, and the like. So it's important to know your tools and find them. In terms of the ability to communicate and how to communicate, each platform has its strengths and weaknesses. And so if you are especially someone who wants to communicate to as many people as possible, or many types of people as possible, it's good to be on more than one platform. and to take media from one platform and make it available on others as well. If you have a website, and I'm not assuming that people have websites, although of course many people do, but if you have a website, you can often use it as a second home for your content. Uh, since while we all know that websites have many web accessibility issues of their own, they are still typically more powerful, have more tools available to make content accessible, and social media apps in many cases are more limited. So having your website as a backup uh, for your communications is a good idea. Clearly, one needs to think about one's audience, and this, of course, is true of any communication issue, and it's not just an accessibility issue, but you need to think about who you are trying to reach and use the right tools and the right platforms to reach them. Overall, of course, it's incredibly important to communicate clearly, and there are lots of different aspects of communicating clearly, and we'll get to that in a moment. In terms of communication, and of course, recognizing that some people enjoy the privacy or anonymity that social media can provide, but if you're not one of those people, or if you're not in a place where that is your desire, you should fill out your social media profile, the profile section of your social media account, so that people know who you are and how they might contact you, or if not contact you, find your different social media platforms. Unless you want to be mysterious, it's better to let people know who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and where they can find you. And next, and really a point that I've made probably several times already, you need to take the time to make your content accessible until it's second nature, until you are being accessible by design yourself. Many people approach social media with a lot of urgency and the desire to kind of cut corners. And of course, social media makes communicating incredibly easy and quick, especially for people without communications related disabilities. But of course, that leads to people being sloppy and lazy and failing to communicate with many people. So you need to take a step back and take the time, not just to know what your tools are, but to use them each time. And I'm probably as guilty as anyone of not doing this. I just gleefully go on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and post untagged photos, and probably have broken every rule that I'm going to mention here. But we're all a work in progress, as the internet itself is, and so the best that we can do is to improve. And I think even by preparing for this presentation, I've become more aware myself of what I need to do to be an accessible communicator on the internet. Last, in terms of general principles, although one could go on and on with general principles, is to avoid content that creates barriers. As I mentioned, photos without tags and videos without captions or descriptions and the like. There's various types of content that create various barriers and ways to present it, and that in many ways is much of the rest of this presentation is identifying those barriers and how to overcome them more specifically. So how should one communicate clearly? Using clear language is important. especially in a world of, let's just note for the moment that I'm speaking in English, which is my first language, and in many ways my only language. Especially those who've tried to hear me speak French will agree. English is essentially my only language. But many people who are listening here, it's not their first language, it's not their native tongue, and even if there are no other accessibility issues, just the language barrier is important to keep in mind. And there are many ways that native English speakers can do a very bad job of communicating in English, especially to those for whom it's not their first tongue. So it's important to use language that is clear and that is not ambiguous and that can be understood by most, as many as possible. One rule that those of us in the Internet Society, especially those who participate in ICANN, public policy development processes, have to remember is avoiding acronyms as much as possible. And the same goes for abbreviations. I've said ISOC without explaining that I meant the Internet Society. I've said ICANN without explaining that I mean the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. I did say policy development process rather than PDP, but in certain communities, it's entirely possible to put together an entire sentence that is only acronyms, which ensures that no one who is not an insider will understand anything you're saying. That is not a good communication goal. So learning to avoid acronyms, learning to avoid abbreviations, learning to explain them when you must use them. Of course, social media, especially those types of social media that grew out of SMS and short messages, are full of acronyms, whether it's LOL for laugh out loud, and acronyms are constantly coming up as well, whether it's WTF, which I will not translate, or others. So it's important to recognize that this is a rule that you can't necessarily use absolutely, and that certain acronyms are almost as well known as the words, but nonetheless, trying to avoid some of these conventions that exclude people is a very important thing to keep in mind. As mentioned before, it's good to use common words, avoid idioms and slang and jargon and inside jokes. If I say forget about it, does anybody know what I mean by that, or why it's funny? Some do, most won't. And saying something is as good as sliced bread, people might not understand that. There's also idioms become and slang become outdated, especially as one grows older. One starts to sound like a history lesson instead of a cool person. But best to avoid those entirely and speak in ways that can be understood, that can be translated, that can be interpreted, that can be captioned and captured for as many different forms of accessibility as possible. Moving from kind of language itself to the packaging of language, where available, one should use headings and other ways of organizing your content. This is something that is available great degree on internet websites, and of course it's one that's also violated constantly on internet sites, but at least it's available to those who are programming, creating websites. many types of social media do not allow for headings or other forms of organization, but you should know where they are available, such as in LinkedIn, for instance, and use them. For those who are using screen readers, it's very important to use headings, and frankly, for organization for anybody, it's good. It's also important, generally speaking, to put content into digestible chunks and to use space to separate text, depending upon what accessibility issue you're dealing with. But this is an important aspect. Of course, one should try to be accessible to all people. So we're really thinking about trying to use all of these rules rather than to choose which ones to observe. Also, avoid the use of multiple fonts, styles, and variations. Avoid the use of italics and bolds and underlines where you can, of course, but especially when you're doing it for fun or gratuitously, one should avoid it. Listening to a screen reader read some heavily formatted text with bouncing between different fonts and styles is excruciating, and it's very selfish if you realize that you don't have to be the one who's listening. So those are some overall communications rules and tools to keep in mind. And now my screen is, there we go. My screen was failing to advance, but now we're on the next. Some other considerations about communication. Think about including people with disabilities in your images and content. And of course, this is a general diversity topic. If all of your pictures are just, and images and descriptions are all of, say, white males, when your communication is intended to be universal, it's not, and it portrays a world that, in essence, doesn't exist, and creates feelings of exclusion. On the other hand, one needs to be somewhat careful about portraying people with disabilities, and especially avoiding stereotypes and dismissive language and the like. One should avoid ableist language as well, and it's, again, requires you to slow down and think about what you're saying before you say things such as stand back and stand by. Not everyone is able to stand. One should avoid various triggers. Of course, strobe-like images can create issues. There can be PTSD triggers, PTSD being post-traumatic stress disorder. So explain the acronym. One should also avoid shocking content and microaggressions and the like that can create communication barriers or actively turn people away. I recognize that for some people on social media, using PTSD triggers and shocking content is virtually the only thing they do on social media, and maybe this won't reach them in that regard, but maybe at least they'll learn how to make that shocking content more accessible to everyone, for better or worse. And a lot of social media content communication is, of course, for better or worse. But other than this, I won't get into sort of content judgment too much. Some of you may be in organizations, jobs, or other organizations where you volunteer your time. There should be a social media policy in your organization that embraces accessibility. So there should be policies and procedures in place for making social media inclusive and accessible. If you have the type of organization where you can provide training, and this itself is an example of training right here, you should do so. There's plenty of training that is out there on the internet that you can bring in, as well as, of course, creating training content yourself. So the other important thing is to provide tools and access as well. And that includes both tools that are available within various social media platforms, as well as tools that are outside the platform, such as color contrast checkers and the like. Lastly, it's important, of course, to have a culture of inclusiveness, and accessibility by design, so that this all becomes second nature, becomes expected and understood as a baseline for communication. Some special types of communication that are very specific to social media include hashtags. It's important when using hashtags to use camel case, which just means to capitalize each word within a hashtag. This is very important for communication. So if you put Black Lives Matter all with in lowercase, this will be read or could be read as Black Lives Smatter, which is meaningless. If you capitalize Black Lives and Matter, then it will be read as Black Lives Matter. So use camel case, use the internal capitals. Probably best where you can to put hashtags at the end of your social media posts for readability purposes. Remember why you're using hashtags. They're a tool to help your content be found. They're not just a decoration or a fun thing to use. Should not use a lot of hashtags because they can get tedious, and avoid kind of random gratuitous acts of hashtagging that mean nothing. Also, hashtag jokes can be distracting as well. Emojis are also a big part of communicating on the internet, but they leave something to be desired in terms of communication, especially given that the emojis are by definition a visual medium, and screen readers may describe or announce them, but they may not describe them fully, and of course they will describe them literally. And there's kind of an emoji slang that has developed over time on the internet that may not be understandable, especially to someone who is not in on it. Just as with acronyms, people can write entire sentences in emoji, and that's very problematic for communication. Emoji slang can also fail. You may know what you mean when you post eggplant, eggplant, eggplant raindrops. Other people may not know. Other people who know may not want to know as well. So consider that also. One should also avoid the use of ASCII art and lettering made from letterers. Here are a couple of examples on the screen. I apologize to anybody who ever has to read these with a screen reader, because it will just be a very distressing process. So what you might see here, if you without any accessibility issues, is a depiction of an Apple laptop with made entirely out of characters, colons and brackets and the like, and then it says "Hello World" made out of the letters, but that is not going to be read as "Hello World" by a screen reader. It's just going to be a lot of repetitive letters, which will be unfortunate. So those should be avoided. Cute as though they may be, uh, it's a barrier to communication, not a form of communication. Come back to alt text. Very fundamental accessibility tool. Alt text simply is a text field that is attached to an image and describes that image, a photo or illustration or the like. And every image you post that is a communication should be alt tagged. Decorative images do not need to be described, but you should consider whether you need them at all, especially as you tailor your messages to an accessible community. Nearly every platform that accommodates images accommodates alt text, but they have varying ability of tools to put the alt text in place. But you should assume and try to find the alt text tools in your social media platforms. More likely than not, they're there. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, apply the alt text to the photo in your camera or photo editing app before you get to your social media platform. So you should learn to use the alt text in each platform. Here's an example. In Twitter, you need to go to settings and turn on the alternative text for images. You can do that by navigating to settings and then display and sound, and then to accessibility and turning on compose image description. And after that, each time you tweet an image, the added description dialog should come up. Each platform has its own method for doing this, but generally speaking, goes around some form of finding the accessibility settings within your tool. In terms of creating alt text, there are a few rules of the road, and right there is a piece of idiomatic language since we're not on a road, but in any case, alt text is limited to 420 characters. Doesn't mean you should use them all, but you should use enough to be descriptive. Alt text is basically straight text. There's no special formatting, lists or headings available. No stylization. You should be concise, but at the same time being descriptive. Don't just say image or photo or picture of a man if the man is Albert Einstein, or if it's Donald Trump. It's important to know who is in the picture. Some pictures can be used for different purposes, and you should consider what your description should say so that it's tailored to that purpose. Consider, which features to describe or emphasize. There's a lot of different ways to describe more complex images, and you can describe them in a way that is useless, especially if you're trying to, make a point. If you're showing Mr. Evil petting his hairless cat, just saying "man with cat" is not going to provide any communication. Now, some people may not know who Mr. Evil is, and that is, of course, a related issue. But at least if your point is particular, your description should be particular enough so people can understand your point. But again, the need to be concise is important. There are other ways to say more than an alt text. You can reply to a post or tweet with more information. You can provide a link to more information. You should, of course, try not to be redundant if you're putting descriptions in text and alt text and in also in controlled text fields such as location or the like. But again, generally speaking, more information is better than less, as long as you stay concise and to the point. Color and contrast are incredibly important issues. Shouldn't rely solely on color to communicate meaning. And if you are using color, say in a chart or a map, don't rely on subtle contrasts between colors and shades. That may be lost on many people. You should always provide a link to a table or an alternate description or something that will create an alternate method for communicating. Sometimes a map, say during an election, is a very powerful way of communicating to many people, but recognize that it does not communicate to all people. One should, of course, avoid poor color contrast between foreground text and background and the like. If you're using a template or available tools for formatting, don't assume that it will create accessible text. As a matter of fact, probably the opposite. It's very easy to create inaccessible or poor contrast text. Unfortunately, very few platforms have internal contrast checkers, and some of them don't have a way to allow an outside contrast checker to be applied directly, in which case you'll have to find the color values, which are numerical values, import those to a checker and check them there. Of course, when in doubt, stick with dark and light. In this presentation, I actually changed the standard template that the Internet Society provides. The background was not white, it was more of a tan. The lettering was actually smaller, and in some cases the colors were not as differentiated. Of course, using black and white all the time can be boring, and but you need to stick with dark and light where you can, and also be aware that not all color combinations work equally well. I was working on a website for a client where their signature colors were green and gold, and in order to achieve acceptable levels of contrast between green and gold, you end up with almost black green and a fairly pale yellow. So that is just an example of a color combination that does not work so well. There are various text editing and formatting tools, and platforms offer some tools. Some offer more tools and flexibility than others. As I mentioned before, LinkedIn has fairly powerful text formatting tools for much of its content. Not that different from what you might find in Google Docs or in Microsoft Word. In other cases, you're really limited to just entering straight text. Where you do have heading styles available, you should use them. Where you have the ability to mark up a list properly, you should use that as well. LinkedIn has that. LinkedIn also has a block quote tool that'll distinguish quotes from other text. All these things should be used, and you should look for them in other platforms. Another thing to keep in mind is that platforms are constantly improving and changing the tools they have. Every once in a while, the changes are not improvements, but most of the time they are. So check back often for new tools. Unfortunately, they're not always well announced when they're added, but it's good that they're being added. So that really covers the first aspect here, the social media side of things. Talk about accessible video. both use in presentations and in social media. So there are three main elements for accessible video: captions and audio descriptions, and using an accessible video player. So captions, to explain briefly for those who don't know, take the audio elements of the video and make them appear as text, at the appropriate time, providing access for deaf or hearing impaired people. Captions should describe nonverbal elements as well as text, especially when you're captioning, say, a movie or the like. An audio description is also another basic tool. This is a description of the video's visual elements that can be added to the soundtrack, providing access for those who are blind or visually impaired as well. And so an accessible video player should be navigable by someone using keyboard navigation or assistive devices. Captions and transcriptions can be made easily available, but it does take some effort. And I want to thank especially Judith and Jolie, who've worked behind the scenes to make sure that as various different types of accessibility are available on this presentation. There are, of course, automatic captioning tools, but beware. They result in mistakes often. If you do use an automatic captioning tool for what I've called asynchronous media, something that you'll be posting, it needs to be checked before it goes live. Mistakes are common, and they can result in inappropriate language or unintended consequences. Auto captioning on the fly should be avoided as much as possible. When I turned on this presentation, I was offered the ability to add captioning to it. Of course, skipped that since we are that's being taken care of through better means. But if I had, it would be, of course, an issue. To state the obvious, at least some captions are not the same as subtitles. Subtitles are just the spoken words being turned into subtitles, often in a different language than is being spoken on the screen. The captions include audio and sound effects and identify the speakers and the like. And the goal of a caption is to be accurate and faithful and synchronized in time, whereas subtitles sometimes involve a level of interpretation and even a level of art in trying to make the communication available to someone who's speaking a different language. And transcripts, of course, are important. Separate documents that are made available essentially afterwards that provide a complete version of the audio, sounds, and speakers. Captioning and transcripts can sometimes run into each other as tools, and one can come from the other. As with auto captioning, raw transcripts often need a review afterwards before they're published permanently. Although sometimes it's important not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you do post a raw transcript, important to try to replace it with something more final as quickly as possible. Most social media platforms, or I shouldn't say most, some social media platforms offer a caption workflow and creation capacity within the platform, such as YouTube. If you can upload a caption file if you have it in a standard captioning format. You can get captioning from various services. You can create a caption from an existing transcript if you already have one, and then you can use that, paste the transcript in, and it'll be auto synchronized with the words. If you are a serious YouTube content creator, you can create new closed captions in YouTube Studio. That requires typing them in by hand in YouTube Studio application. But important to keep in mind that YouTube, most people just go to YouTube and put a video up, and then they walk away. That's only scratching the surface of what you can or should do. And of course, you can edit automatically generated captions. If you are generating captions automatically, there's you need to set the language. Obviously, auto captioning is really not going to work if you're captioning English using a French captioning tool. In the end, these can be exported, all of these, and used in other settings. Twitter has its own captioning issues. They have a Twitter Media Studio, and Twitter Ads have captioning, but don't expect that most people are going to be using those tools in Twitter or Twitter API. You can still provide a captioning file in these different elements or tools. There are, of course, alternatives. You can burn the caption into the video before you post it. You can also provide a link to a captioned video on another source or platform that is more accommodating, such as YouTube, or embed a captioned YouTube video. And embedding a YouTube video as opposed to posting the video natively within the app is something to consider, because some of the social media platforms don't handle special aspects of video as well, but they of course do handle, in many cases, embedding. So you have to see over time what works best. And if you're serious about communicating with video, important to learn as much as you can about this. Audio descriptions, obviously, also very important. As noted before, this is providing an audible description of visual cues. Typically, this should be written in advance and then recorded. It is possible to do live described video, of course, but that's a skill and should not be tried by the faint of heart. The audio description should fit in between the existing audio elements, shouldn't run it over. Social media audio descriptions are not as advanced, I would say, as captioning. Typically, it has to be baked into the video, and it can't be disabled, which means that if you don't need the audio description, it's still going to be there, which in turn may require posting two versions, one with and without the description. Some social media platforms that are trying to look out for spam or bot posting or other sorts of abusive posting may view repetitive posting as problematic. So that's something to keep in mind. And there are various sites and tools out there to embed and add audio descriptions. I don't necessarily want to endorse any one of them, but they're out there. Other considerations about video accessibility that aren't purely kind of tool oriented. One basic, and this is not just true of accessibility for the hearing impaired, but for everybody, is frankly audio quality as important as video quality. I've seen many audio visuals that seem to be done with a $1,500 camera and a $5 microphone. or no special microphone at all. So spending time caring about the sound in an audio-visual context is important. And many cameras have poor audio and need to be supplemented with an additional microphone or multiple microphones, and the type of microphone is important too. Of course, in video, contrast issues are just as relevant as they are on websites or social media posting. So one should be looking at the type of the video quality. If you are embedding a video, as I discussed earlier, you should avoid autoplay, or else you'll just have videos going off on people all the time. Not good. You should make sure that the controls are displayed, or that's been enabled. There are some cases where you won't get them unless you make them available. The audiovisual window should be capable of resizing. And as I've mentioned before, tools are changing and usually improving every once in a while. A useful tool is taken down, which is very frustrating. It may be the idea that because a limited number of people are using it, it's not worth maintaining. But of course, that is an enemy of accessibility, that type of attitude. So that pretty much brings us to the end. You need to look at my mugshot here, which is, speaking of visual quality, much lower resolution than I thought it would be. I must have taken a very small version of my photo. I'm not actually that blurry in real life. In real life, I'm a partner in a law firm, Moses and Singer, in New York, with an office in the Chrysler Building, our only office in the Chrysler Building. But as you can see behind me, my office is now in my bedroom until further notice. I can go into the office now, but I choose not to at the moment. In addition to being a partner at Moses and Singer and a practicing lawyer, I'm also a founder or refounder of the ISOC Accessibility Special Interest Group, and serve as the treasurer. And I'll acknowledge our other officers who are on this call, Shabir and Judith and Jolie, all of whom have made this possible, in many cases more possible than I've made it. You can see that I went to school a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. If you're not seeing this visually, graduated from Columbia Law School in 1986 and Wesleyan University in Connecticut in 1981. Those seem like just yesterday, but I realize that actually was quite a long time ago. Hopefully I'm aging gracefully. We have a few minutes, so I will leave things open for Q&A if we have Q&A capacities.
Yeah, thank Greg. This is Judith Hallerstein again. Thanks so much for this excellent presentation. As Jolly posted a link, anyone can access it from the presentation link, and Jolly will resend around the links at the end. But I also wanted to thank you, Greg, for that great presentation. And even I also want to make sure that people know that it's not only at the beginning when you can insert your alt tags. If you have photos already on LinkedIn and all that, you could just edit those photos and add in the alt text. So in all the documents, you can just edit and add it in. And so people can go back and make their stuff more accessible now that they learned the tools and how to do it. But I just want to put out, if people have any questions, if you could raise your virtual hand or your hand on the participants list. To do that, if you're in a mobile or tablet device, it's usually on the top. If you're on a desktop, It's usually on the bottom under the participant list. Okay, so we have our first question here from Skip Keats. Okay, Skip.
Hi. One thing I noticed when you were talking about jargon and idiomatic language, what you missed was things related to, for example, inserting foreign languages into your text without explaining what it means. This comes up because I was just reviewing something, so a lot of legalese, and they were using lots of Latin without an explanation, and it was for people who, some of the people using it would be teenagers and younger. And it was all the legal notice stuff, and they had put a lot of it in Latin with no translation. I can read Latin, which is fine, but that came up. I was thinking about that, and what you're an attorney. What say you?
I think that's a very good point, and attorneys often communicate in ways that purposely or accidentally create barriers, such as the use of legal Latin, the use of run-on sentences, the use of huge blocky paragraphs, the use of sentences with clauses embedded within clauses within clauses, the use of doubled language. You know, why is it important to say cease and desist? Is there really a reason? Is there a reason to say res ipsa loquitur when what you mean is the thing speaks for itself? Is there a reason? Is there a reason?
One of the ones that was used.
Yes. Is there a reason
ipso
to
facto
listen?
Was another.
Ipso facto, absolutely. And there's a lot of legal Latin that gets used, and even for someone who actually speaks or has learned Latin as a language, the pronunciation of legal Latin is painful to listen to as well.
That is true.
That's something to keep in mind. And this is not just a legal question. There are people who throw in foreign languages. Some of them will be understood or really are absorbed into the language. I was going to put in here that something was passé, which really is, I think, used in English, but I couldn't find. It was late, and I wasn't able to find the accent or the diacritical to put on it, so I decided to avoid using passé. So I avoided these en masse in my usage. Some people like to show off by using multiple languages and switching languages, which for interpretation purposes is difficult. In the ICANN world, where we have sometimes multiple language interpreters, people who are experienced will announce, "I will now speak in French," and if they are multilingual, they'll announce at the end that they will speak in English. And switch so that the interpreters aren't caught flat-footed as you're switching from one to another. So it's important to recognize that language can be a barrier, and especially the use of multiple languages and language that serves as jargon or in-crowd things such as legal Latin. So thanks, Skip, for that.
Thank you, Skip. We have another question from Jenny Wenland in the chat. She says, "I know we're talking a lot about social media, but any general tips for websites as well? We struggle being a small team needing a drag and drop platform. Any big tips or recommendations?"
Well, in terms of social media, or in terms of web accessibility, and that's a huge presentation in itself, and maybe I will do that in a future time. But in addition to what we've covered specifically here, very important to make sure that your navigation is accessible. Don't use pictures as the sole navigation device. Shopping cart is not necessarily going to communicate what it should. A magnifying glass is even worse in terms of search. And of course, if it's a picture of a magnifying glass or a shopping cart, it will just be read as picture unless you have alt text. Similarly, use of headings, I think, is even more important in structuring websites, critical in terms of creating focus points. for reading. Also, form fields are often abused, and unnamed form fields is a big problem uh, with websites that use forms. That is low-hanging fruit in that regard. Also, color contrast. The good news about websites as opposed to social media is that there are a huge number of checkers that are available. If you're working, say, in Chrome or in WordPress, there are native checkers or extensions that are available um, that are really quite good, for their tools. Of course, any form of tool is going to miss things that a human checker should use. And recognizing your small team, it's still important, if you can, to have things checked by a human. You both has the disability in question and the training to work with you on that. So uh, it's important to reach out and find uh, human testers with the skill to help you with that. So those just a few things there, but we could put a whole presentation together on web accessibility, which is really how I got into the accessibility issues in the first place.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Our next question is from our esteemed president, Mohammed Shabir. Shabir.
Thank you, Judith, for the opportunity. And Greg, thank you very much for a very, very wonderful presentation and very insightful discussion, which is very timely. I would just like to urge my fellow chapter members and leaders who are on this call to at least apply these guidelines onto their websites, their social media platforms, and in their communications while they communicate their messages within ISOC or outside ISOC in their communities. Secondly, Greg, you raised very valid points about social media websites, and except for a few exceptions, I've seen social media websites of even major media networks being inaccessible, and the issues being raised on these media platforms. For instance, there may be the website of BBC or CNN or New York Times would be accessible, but when it comes to their social media platforms, there remain certain issues to be addressed. And this is where sometimes it is said that the social media platforms are sometimes, okay, look, these are taken as for granted sometimes the managers or the handlers do not take care of these issues. But certainly I would like your take on this, that certain the mainstream media or the media platform networks not applying these accessibility guidelines onto their social media platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Shabir. Very important, and it's true that social media platforms often get less attention than the websites, and they shouldn't. It's really an incredibly important aspect of communication. You also mentioned the fact that we should learn to apply these, and that reminded me that I should remind everyone here, if they haven't already done so, to apply to join the Internet Society Accessibility Special Interest Group. The Accessibility SIG can be joined by going to internetsociety.org, joining the Internet Society itself, and then finding and selecting the Accessibility Special Interest Group among the chapters and groups that you can join. We have a questionnaire to help understand our members better. So you'll fill that out. Of course, if you have any questions about that, feel free to try to contact Shabir or Judith Jolie or myself about that. Hopefully it is self-explanatory. Because we have a questionnaire, there's a little bit of almost a waiting list, or at least a queue to get admitted. But it's worth the wait. And of course, you don't need to be a member to participate in things such as this. Kelly Elkins has put our direct link to joining the Accessibility SIG in the chat as well. So hopefully you'll join. I'll also mention, of course, that it's free, which is a good price, and also another barrier to accessibility for many people that should not be ignored, of course, as well. I see some discussion in the chat as well about the Web Content Access Guidelines, or WCAG, that are promulgated by the W3C, the Web Content, the World Wide Web Consortium. That's a very basic tool, and the latest version of it is 2.1. There's a link to that in the chat as well. There are levels of accessibility, A, AA, AAA, that each one, level A is the most basic and includes tools and issues that affect the broadest number of people. AA, a bit more focused and specialized, and AAA the most. Each one, of course, adds all of the topics under the previous level. Typically, websites aim or should aim for AA. However, if you are seeking to communicate, especially with the disabled community of people with disabilities, consider AAA, or at least consider the elements of AAA that will apply to the group that you're trying to communicate with. At least at the level of AA, it does not really affect the quality of your overall website presentation for people without disabilities. Web designers sometimes get frustrated because it does require a little extra thought, and sometimes a little extra cash and time to deal with these things. But going to the level of AA is really important as well. As mentioned, there are other standards too, aside from the WCAG guidelines, which of course are privately promulgated. And the bottom line is what I like to call functional accessibility. You can look at standards and try to meet them and not be accessible for other reasons that aren't captured by the standards. You can also, in some cases, fail to meet certain standards while maintaining accessibility. One of the most important things to note, especially in websites where you have multiple layers and lots of content, is to avoid barriers, absolute blockers. There are things that you can work around and things you just can't. So even if you're not perfect, what you really need to avoid is stranding someone and leaving them unable to navigate, except by backing out and probably going somewhere else. Skip, I see your hand is up again. Please go ahead.
Skip, maybe that was an old hand. But if not,
this is Stuart. I had my hand up.
Oh, Stuart, yes. And also, I also want to mention that one thing we had put in our blog also about this is that virtual backgrounds are very difficult for people with hearing impairments, because unless you're using a green screen, then sometimes your face appears and disappears. And so that is also why there's a problem with virtual backgrounds unless you're using a green screen, as well as what Greg was talking about, contrast. People wear, if they're having a light not shining on them, or they're wearing light clothes. Sometimes the light makes their faces disappear, and people who are reading lips have a hard time with that. So there's a lot of issues, but Stuart, I know we only have 3 minutes left, so go with your question.
Yeah, hi, I just had a quick question, and that is, what work, if any, has been done to address the challenges of folks with cognitive disabilities? I know it's a big area, and the cognitive disability spectrum is very wide, but can any of you speak to that?
Well,
Yeah. So we could actually, Judith, we can actually also direct you. There will be a session at the IGF at the DCAD, which the Accessibility SIG is the secretariat for on that. And we try to organize a cognitive session, and we still may, but we haven't got enough speakers yet to speak on it, because a lot of the issues of cognitive disabilities are they're having trouble speaking it. They want people to read out the text. So that's why we read out questions, or if they prefer to type in their question and have us read it out for them. Greg?
Yeah, I would also mention first that the WCAG guidelines do take into account cognitive and motor, as well as the visual and audio impairments. Some of the issues I mentioned in terms of writing clearly also go to issues of cognitive disability, and that's why they're there. But there's so much of a focus, especially on audio visual disabilities. It's important to remember that there are cognitive disabilities of various kinds, and also motor disabilities in terms of being able to move around as well. I'll also mention in terms of accessibility that I turned off my virtual background that was on, because I do not have a green screen, as you can see. I also have a couple of lights shining on me, because my workspace is actually really dark without the lights, and my other light is above my head, which creates a kind of a very extreme sort of lighting situation. So I've looked at that as well. Also, I'm trying my best not to speak too quickly. Being a native New Yorker, I normally speak very quickly, and that is terrible for our captioners and interpreters, and I apologize for just doing that.
I know Skip has a final question, but we
yes,
have 1 minute left. So
I just want to also thank our captioner, our sign language interpreter, for their help here. This has been great and much appreciated. And yes, these are real live captions. They are too good for machines. Thank you for everyone who's been bringing this to everybody. Skip?
This is more of a statement, sort of response to what someone asked. But in the WCAG, there's an entire section on readability. And what I mentioned earlier about the legal stuff, that's actually one of the things I was reviewing, and I was recommending a client change the way the legal stuff was written, because it was all gobbledygooky legalese that someone without a PhD, even someone with a PhD, might have had difficulty understanding. One of the things is you're supposed to write to a lower secondary education standard, so someone who's like, I guess, 12 years old can understand it. So I'm just throwing that out there, and that plays into it. That's the cognitive stuff in the WCAG.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks again for everyone coming. We are very cognizant of the time and of the time of our interpreters, and our captioners. So thank you, and we hope we are going to be putting up a registration now coming up shortly for our next session on November 19th, as well as for our later sessions. We did ASL, but we could also do other languages if there are people who are interested in that. And in our DCAD session, which is the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability at the IGF, we will be using International Sign, which is not a language, but it's a way, a symbols of communicating to others. Because like there are many spoken languages, there are also many sign languages. So thanks again for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at another event. You can watch these live again on the live stream channel of Internet Society, as well as several other channels that is simulcast on. And Stuart Peter Crosby, who works with the cognitive disabilities, was here too. So we try to cover every aspect of it. And if you have any ideas for suggested topics, please let us know.
Thank you. Will do.
Okay. So.